Breaking news now at noon and streaming on CBSN Bay Area. California Senator Kamala Harris is out of the 2020 presidential race. Good afternoon. I'm Michelle Griego. Harris made the announcement to suspend her campaign just within the last couple of hours.
This comes just weeks before the deadline to get off the ballot in California.
She was initially one of the favorites to take on Donald Trump in the 2020 race.
A shakeup in the Democratic primary. Senator Kamala Harris announcing she is dropping out of the race for president.
It is with deep regret, but also with deep gratitude, that I am suspending our campaign today. My campaign for president simply does not have the financial resources to continue, and the financial resources we need to continue. I'm not a billionaire. I can't fund my own campaign.
In a statement, she explained she did not have enough funding to continue her run for the White House. Harris announced her candidacy nearly a year ago. A top California Democrat has made a decision about which 2020 presidential candidate he'll support. Democrat Representative of Elk Grove, Ami Bera, revealing today that he's endorsing former Vice President Joe Biden. He's the fourth member of the state's congressional delegation to do so.
Joining us now here in the studio is U.S. Studies Center fellow and Sky News contributor Bruce Welby. Good to see you.
Just another rocky day around the world.
Absolutely. Are you surprised by Kamala Harris? It all comes down to money, right?
No, there were two really devastating profiles on her campaign last week in the Washington Post and the New York Times, which is the campaign wasn't going anywhere. Here's a woman of great promise, great charisma, seemed to have Obama around her. She couldn't put it together, get critical mass, communicate a compelling message, and her campaign just imploded.
Let's get right over to CBS reporter Natalie Brand, live on Capitol Hill with the latest campaign shakeup. Natalie?
Good afternoon, Michelle. And an aide tells CBS News that Senator Harris actually made this decision last night, but then publicly announced it online this afternoon, calling it one of the toughest decisions of her life. So she posted this on Medium, writing, "My campaign simply doesn't have the financial resources to continue." She goes on to say she's not a billionaire, an apparent jab at some of the other candidates in this race. And Senator Harris says as her campaign has gone on, it's become harder and harder to raise the money she needs to compete.
The announcement comes several weeks after Harris drastically cut her staff, even slashing paychecks in an effort to direct more resources to Iowa, which holds the first caucus in the nation. As a candidate, Harris touted her background as a progressive prosecutor who championed criminal justice reform. But Harris has struggled to gain sustained momentum in the polls, with the first vote just 9 weeks away. Democrats still in the race for president, now reacting.
She is a first-rate intellect, a first-rate candidate, and it's a real competitor. I have mixed emotions about it because she is really a solid person, and we're loaded with talent.
She is an incredibly strong public servant and has done great work already for our country in the U.S. Senate, and I know she is going to do even more.
The Trump campaign is also reacting, posting sarcastic images on Twitter mocking Harris and telling ABC News, quote, "Somehow we will press on." Elizabeth Herr, ABC News, New York.
Now, this announcement comes as Senator Harris continued to struggle in recent polls and also seemed to struggle at times with her campaign messaging and where she fit in within the ideological spectrum of this large Democratic field. She had recently closed some of her field offices in New Hampshire, but the senator was making a full court press in Iowa. She even spent Thanksgiving there, campaigned there through the weekend, and had events planned later this week. The Associated Press had even reported that Governor Gavin Newsom was planning to visit Iowa mid-month to campaign on Senator Harris's behalf. And what's interesting to note, Senator Harris had already qualified for the upcoming Democratic debate to be held in Los Angeles later this month. But in her announcement today, she said she's taken stock and looked at this from every angle.
In good faith, I cannot tell you, my supporters and volunteers, that I have a path forward if I don't believe I do. So, to you, my supporters, my dear supporters, it is with deep regret, but also with deep gratitude, that I am suspending our campaign today.
She ended her statement on an optimistic note, saying she will continue to fight for what her campaign has been all about. She says justice. Now, the timing of this unexpected announcement today comes just 2 months before the Iowa caucuses, but interesting timing here in Congress as senators wait to learn whether they will be sitting as jurors during an impeachment trial early next year. Michelle?
All right, Natalie Brand, thank you. And we'll have much more on this story coming up at 5 and 6 tonight and throughout the day on CBSN Bay Area.
For more, I want to bring in political commentator and pollster Fernand Amandi. He hosts the Strange Days podcast and is a lecturer at the University of Miami's Political Science Department. So, Fernand, what's your initial reaction to that?
Well, the news, Andrew, is really not surprising when you look at the fact that Senator Harris's poll numbers in both the early primary states and at the national level have been gradually declining over the last few months. She entered this race, as you alluded to, with a lot of fanfare, very high expectations, and at one point looked to be the odds-on favorite to win, especially after a very powerful early debate performance in June of this year. But as we see throughout these campaigns for the presidency, they rely on money and they rely on support. And she was really lacking those over the last few months. And that's why I think she has concluded her campaign today.
Why? I mean, she started strongly. At one point, Harris was seen as potentially the most formidable candidate against Donald Trump. So why did she lack the support? Why did she lack the money?
Well, I think some of the recommendations that are coming out now, questions about how the campaign was organized and structured, what the strategic focus was as well. A decision to not necessarily play in South Carolina, which was a state that seemed geared towards her strengths and advantages. There is a tremendous African-American vote in that state. She chose instead to put all of her chips in the early contest of Iowa and yet was not able to gain traction there. I think one of the other elements that folks are looking at, we saw this in Barack Obama's campaign for the presidency in 2008. Oftentimes, a presidential campaign is an indicator of how someone will govern when they are in office as president. Obama's campaign, famous for the no-drama Obama style, very organized, very precise, whereas all throughout the campaign, Harris's candidacy was plagued by infighting and turmoil and organizational issues. And I think all of those factors together have led us to this point where she's now out of the race and the sweepstakes to become the Democratic nominee in 2020.
How much of a factor do you think that she was in such a crowded field, and the field is still so crowded?
Well, indeed it is. And, you know, what one has to keep in mind, there are now still over a dozen candidates in the race. Only one can end up the victor. There's only one survivor in the presidential nomination sweepstakes. But I think the fact that she is a candidate that still had a very, albeit smaller, but impassioned base of support, I think you're going to see the other candidates look to try and court the Harris support base. Not only that, Senator Harris herself is someone who already now is going to be on the short list of whoever emerges as the Democratic nominee's running mate choice, because she brings a lot of attractive qualities to the table. She's young, she's dynamic, she's proved on the campaign to be very articulate. She also is a female and an African American, which represents a very important part of the Democratic base constituency. So I don't think we've heard the last yet of Senator Harris on the national scene.
What's your hunch about where her supporters go?
Well, you know, she was trying to stake out a candidacy that bridged the two elements of the Democratic constituency, the moderate centrist elements and the progressive left elements. So that's going to be the interesting question. I think right now you will certainly see Joe Biden, who there was certainly an effort early on in the race for him to try and enlist her people and her support. You'll see him play there, but also for those two remaining female candidates that have a chance to still win the nomination. Talking, of course, about Senator Elizabeth Warren from Massachusetts and Senator Amy Klobuchar from Minnesota. I think you'll see both of those camps try and garner some of that support from Harris supporters who are now looking for who they may want to get behind.
How unusual is it that there are still so many candidates? I mean, this is just, if you were to predict who would win, I mean, that's a challenging thing to do right now, isn't it?
Well, I mean, it is and it isn't. You're correct, Andrew. We are in an unprecedented situation to see really this many candidates this late in the process, certainly on the Democratic side. There have been a baker's dozen before, there have been 6 or 7, but never this many that are still in the 14, 15 candidate count. But the truth of the matter is, looking at it objectively as a political analyst, right now, to my eyes, there are really only 4 or 5 viable candidates that really have a shot at capturing the nomination next year. And this winnowing process is very natural. And actually, as you get into the early part of next year, I think you'll see the race truncate and contract even more. We may be down to less than 10 candidates by the time we get to the new year.
Fernand, thank you. Fernand Amandi in Miami, the political strategist and pollster, is also the host of the Strange Days podcast.
Because this is the funny thing, well, not funny, but it's the interesting thing about this season, the election season, is that she was taking on Joe Biden. This is the whole busing incident about a few months ago now, and they thought, well, this could be the Democratic contender.
Exactly.
And then all of a sudden, gone.
No one really knew what she truly stood for, how she could really bring the country together. On the other hand, today, she's everyone's #1 vice presidential choice.
Right. Was she what was her position?
She's a senator, and she was Attorney General of the state of California.
Attorney General, that's right.
So she had a strong law enforcement, which gave her credentials for the middle.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Look, it's all pretty uninspiring at the moment, I've got to say, but we are still a little way away from the election, and hopefully they can get it together somehow.
It's a race without front runners. You have different candidates leading in different states. So Buttigieg is leading early in Iowa. Joe Biden is still leading nationally, but you can't see a way there's no person to choose right now who can put it all together and claim the nomination. This could be a really long, divisive fight.
We're just looking at some live pictures now. It looks like Donald Trump's at Buckingham Palace, or he's in London anyway. There's a bit going on. There's a bit of a protest going outside the palace at the moment, so he must be in there with the Royals. It's been an interesting couple of weeks for them.
Well, Senator Kamala Harris is dropping out of the race for the White House. Despite some fairly steady poll numbers, Harris told her staffers she's dropping out because her campaign does not have enough funding to continue. The senator from California made that decision yesterday after consulting with family and senior aides. Harris's campaign headquarters were here in Baltimore.